Hello, I'm Mr. McBrien. This is TEJ3M, external hardware. Yesterday we talked about solid state storage of information and particularly about memory. Today we're going to talk about how to set up and configure a home office system, including understanding better the various external components associated with this, including discussing a little bit about the laser printer. So in terms of the types of hardware, we will often break up hardware into two different groups. And these are the input devices like a keyboard or a joystick, and output devices like headphones, like a printer, a monitor, things that push information out to the outside world. Now, there are lots of devices, more and more of them as a matter of fact, that fit in both groups at the same time. So a digital camera will allow you to push information into the computer, but also will allow you to pull information out. Similarly, a webcam. So these combined devices give us a sort of a different look at the functions of the things we connect to our computer. We can also, of course, have external storage, which is another input-output device. All right, so input devices get information to the CPU. So we transfer information from the outside world to the computer. And examples of this, the classics, are the keyboard and the mouse. But there are lots of other ways to get information into a computer as well. Any kind of sensor, webcams, scanners, these things bring information into the computer. As far as output devices, the classics are the monitor and the printer. Anything that communicates with the outside world, though, gets designated as an output device. So we'll put our speakers in there as well. There are many, many other kinds of output devices besides the printer and the monitor. A laser printer is such an interesting device, it's worth digging in to look at this. Now, there's two reasons why it's interesting for us to understand how a laser printer works. One is because it uses so much interesting electronics and physics. And another is because there are many parts inside a laser printer which can be replaced by a skilled computer user. You don't need to be an electronics engineer in order to replace parts of the laser printer. And if we understand how it works, we can actually diagnose problems with the laser printer, order replacement parts, and fix these devices. Now, laser printers, by virtue of the way they work, wear out. And you can spend a lot of money as a business replacing these things if you don't know how to fix them. Okay, so let's unpack this for a second. Go figure, there's a laser involved, but the laser isn't the starting point of this device. In fact, the way that the laser printer functions, we have this drum here, which is given an electrostatic charge. And this electrostatic charge actually causes toner to stick to it. Now, what happens is the laser writes onto this drum assembly the given text we want to have stick to the paper. So the laser puts the image onto the drum which the drum then transfers onto the paper. Now, if this were simply to come out of the laser printer, we'd be very disappointed with the result. The reason why: the text is only stuck to the paper using static electricity. And so the toner will easily wipe away once that static electricity disperses. So the next step after this transfer of the text onto the paper, the next step is actually to heat up the paper and cause the toner to undergo a chemical reaction to fuse the toner to the paper and the toner to the other toner particles, such that it is now effectively glued down. And then the paper then moves through and exits out of the printer. Now this is why, if you've ever noticed that the paper is warm that comes out of the printer, this is because the fuser uses heat to seal down the toner. Okay, so there's a quick look at how a printer functions. Now, let's look at the idea of additional storage. So I'd like you to consider for a second reasons why you might need storage in addition to the hard drive that we know is now contained inside our computer. So what reasons could you have for needing additional storage? Pause the video if you want and think for a bit about things that cause people to need to store a lot of material. And while you're at it, think about reasons why you might not want material to be stored on your computer. Okay, hopefully you came up with some ideas of reasons why you might want to store things somewhere other than the hard drive inside your own computer. The ancients used floppy disks to store information when they didn't want it inside their machine. So these were essentially portable, inexpensive versions of a hard drive that didn't last very long. And they're pretty much relegated to museums these days. Instead, what we have for portable storage, USB flash drives, you might well have one in your backpack right now, and optical CDs and DVDs. Now, if we need to store more information, large-scale information, we might use network-attached storage. So an array of disks, for example, that's connected up through your network. Now, how do we connect together all of these kinds of devices? And the answer to this is unfortunately extremely complicated. As the years go on, I think we're going to see many fewer things for computer engineering students to memorize. But for now, we've got lots of different connectors on the back of our computers. And we need to understand which ones are used for which thing. Remember, our motherboard has expansion slots for devices that need to connect directly in, typically because they need to be very fast. These external connections are for devices that typically don't need as routine data transfer to the CPU, or may not need as fast a data transfer. And there are lots of these kinds of things, and you should be able to recognize these kinds of connections. They are fairly specialized, and the good news is they're largely all being replaced by various flavors of USB. And for this reason, we focus a bit more on the USB connectors. Here are a whole group of USB connectors, ironically called Universal Serial Bus, and then there's so many different flavors that they're far from universal. However, they have advantages over those older formats we saw in the last slide. They're versatile, they're high throughput. In contrast to almost all of the connectors we saw in the previous slide, they provide 5-volt power to the device that is connected up, which is extremely useful. And it's probably worth emphasizing that they're extremely versatile. So you do need to be able to talk about the individual types of these things. And you may have already run into a lot of this with your video game consoles or your cameras or your phones in terms of connecting them up to the PC. Now, sometimes we would prefer not to have to connect up with a wire to our computer. So Bluetooth is a very common short-range wireless communication technique. It has some downsides. I can think of two off the top of my head. One is, of course, you can't get 5-volt power if you're connected up wirelessly. So you need batteries, or your device has to be plugged in somewhere else. And there's also some issues with security when it comes to Bluetooth. Okay, that's our quick run through input and output devices. So these external devices let us customize our computers to better meet our needs that we may not have anticipated when the computer was manufactured or when we purchased it. We can divide them into input and output devices. You should be able to discuss each of these things, but the lines are blurring all the time. Many different devices now are both input and output. There are lots of kinds of ports to connect these devices. Typically, they were in the past specialized for a given application area. USB is replacing most of these now. And for times when wired connections aren't desirable, we have Bluetooth wireless connection as a short-range option. So here are some references if you want to do some more reading about these kinds of things. Certainly you're going to need to spend some time on the cable types that didn't seem useful for me to go into here. Now for your homework, please go ahead and complete the external hardware question sheets, work on your RAM assignment, and don't forget to study for that upcoming quiz. Thanks very much. Have a great night.